Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's Saturday morning show. Landlord mistakes is what we're talking about today, and we're going to cover in particular the 5 major buy-to-let bloopers and how to avoid them as well, because there is, I mean, we've broken it down to the 5 main points. There is a lot of things that people could trip up on. There's a lot to do with legislation and things as well, but we've broken it down to 5 main points, and we'll discuss them in a bit more detail. Karen, Jim, you're both joining me this morning. Jim, what's your thoughts on this?
5 major mistakes. There's more than that, especially for landlords that self-manage. You know, it's almost classic. Most landlords that self-manage, and I'll just put it out there, don't know the smoke detector legislation. They don't know the heat detector legislation. They don't know the carbon monoxide detector legislation. They don't know the requirements for EICRs. They don't know the requirements for gas certificates. They don't know the requirements for procedures in terms of inspections, how much notice you should give the tenant. They don't know anything like that. There's over 170 pieces of legislation to contend with. And the only time that they know is when things go wrong. But boy, do they go wrong. They go horribly wrong, because they don't know what they don't know. They've gone and done it all wrong in the beginning, and it's not set up properly, and therefore it just cascades. It just everything falls to the ground. They've got no comeback. They can't resolve it, and you can't backpedal. And this is why we talk about this a lot, Richard, about landlord rescue. I mean, you do this service, landlord rescue, as well, in terms of helping somebody get everything sorted out if they happen like that. But this is probably the most important thing, is because of this is why people do use letting agents. I mean, letting agents are there to keep everybody on the right track. Everybody thinks they're there just to, it's the money for old rope, eh? Oh, they're just taking money for old rope.
Not like this, not like that.
What happens in there. Well, they don't, but a lot of people actually think that, because everything goes perfectly well in the background. They don't know about all the hassle that goes on, because it's the proverbial duck, swimming on the pond. The legs are going 10 for dozen underneath, but it looks all nice and easy above the surface. But that's effectively what lettings is like, and that's what lettings should be like. The letting agent should be taking all that flack off the landlord and making sure the landlord is protected, and making sure the landlord is compliant. That's key as well. And the 5 mistakes is just the tip of the iceberg when you're going to talk about that. So let's, Karen, what's your thoughts on this initially?
I mean, 9 times out of 10, if we have a self-managed landlord that is coming over, they've decided it's time to have their property managed, 9 times out of 10, they don't have everything in place that they should. And then it's up to us to obviously make sure that they are kept compliant. So there's a lot entailed in not only getting your property ready, both cosmetically, maintenance-wise, but obviously keeping up to date with all the legislation and make sure your property is compliant.
Yeah. So compliance is probably the key issue here, Richard. So, I mean, over to you. And what do you think we should be talking about today, and what are the subjects everybody's going to go? Now, the great thing is there'll be things later on which we are going to cover, and you'll talk about them, but you'll have to hang on till later on. That's the key thing. And as I said, most landlords, 82% of landlords, by the way, self-manage. So there's a lot of people that, if you've not read the legislation back to front, you probably have no idea you're breaking the law right now. So, Richard, over to you.
Yeah. I mean, mistakes can be made, and it's part of life. And I mean, you can laugh some mistakes off, but others are more serious. And when it comes to landlords and letting, there could be a lot of legal and financial consequences of getting things wrong. So you really need to be careful. And like you said, Ken, when we're asked to take over a rental property by someone who's managing it themselves, they're often probably feeling a bit overloaded, disillusioned about the whole prospect of being a landlord, if they're even wise to the fact of how much compliance and regulations and things are in place at the moment. So everybody maybe have their own story and their own perspective and things, but there's definitely a pattern that we see a lot coming through from landlords and it's becoming more complex, and it's usually when they're missing things like knowledge of the local market. It's probably the first thing we're going to cover. Long-term business vision goals. We see a lot of more buy-to-let investors and things coming in, and they're a wee bit lost and need guidance. Valuing time as much as money as well. This is a big thing, Jim, and we talk about that quite a lot. Commercially minded financial management of their actual investments and their portfolio, and planning for the unexpected, because we all know, as much as you think, oh, everything will be fine, There'll always be something. So they're the 5 main things I want to cover today.
Yeah. So it's interesting you talk about the portfolio, because we do portfolio reviews for landlords as well. Not just our own landlords, but other landlords that self-manage.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important for people to understand. So this is what I was saying about hang on till the end, because when we talk about the portfolio reviews and what you should be doing for self-managed landlords, it's perfect for them. So they'll get a lot of information, a lot of knowledge on what they should be doing, how they should be doing it as well.
Yeah, so rather than learn the hard way, listen to what we've got to say today in today's blog, and will probably help you avoid the biggest landlord mistakes and create a more enjoyable and lucrative experience instead of all the doom and gloom that surrounds buy-to-let investment and landlords in particular. So let's look at knowing the market. And this is a good one, Jim. And we were at the lettings day on Wednesday at Murrayfield in Edinburgh. And we spoke to a really knowledgeable woman called Kate Faulkner. And Kate's not a letting agent or anything, but she spoke about the market. And what really interested me was she said, and Karen, you'll be all too aware of this as well, that the market is down to not even just street by street now. Sometimes it's by property. Individually, on an individual basis. This is why it's so important to know the market, or have somebody or an agent on your side who really knows that market, right down to the individual property, maybe not even just the street. And Karen, I know that's something that we come across every day, valuing property and putting price points on the rental and the way the rental market's been recently.
Yeah, it's something that it doesn't surprise us, but it does surprise a lot of landlords how much the rental market can change from street to street, and like you say, even from property to property as well. Like I said, we have to know your area basically, or at least speak to somebody that does. So obviously this can differ not only from the streets, but obviously when you're looking at what target of tenants that you're wanting to achieve. So it'll come down to both rental values, whether it's proximity of how close you are to a railway station, a popular school, or so a detailed search is essential when you are looking for your first property.
Yeah.
So one of the first things we would advise obviously is to take some time to check online listings and speak to agents about the local demand. So get to grips with the local market, as well as what types of homes make the best rentals. So this is something that we've talked about quite a lot as to what type of tenant you're looking to attract. So is it going to be couples? Is it going to be a family? These are all things to take into consideration when you are looking to purchase a new property as a buy-to-let.
You say about looking at the listings online and comparison and things, and that's, I mean, anyone could do that, and we do it as well. We look at what's on the market and what other people are listing, and landlords think, oh, I could do that. I could go and value my own property and put it on the market, but or I know how much it's worth because this one's worth this, but then we look online sometimes and we think that one's not priced right, and 9 times out of 10 it'll sit for quite a while in the market because it's not priced right for where it is or what it is. So it's not.
You can look and you can see all these properties as a comparison, but if they're not priced right, then it's then going to throw yourself off, and then you could be sitting on the market for a lot longer than need be. I mean, I think I sent you one the other day, and I was like, "This is priced ridiculously high." So we'll see how long that they sit for. But it's you can have a look around and see what's there, but it's your knowledge of the market and what's actually let as well. It's different just putting something on the market, but what's the time it's taken to let. And obviously, how long has it sat there for? So you have to know your market. You can't just have a wee look around and be like, well, this one's let at this price, I'll put mine on at the same.
And we more times than often say to a landlord, do you have an expectation of what you would like to achieve, or what you think you can achieve? And they probably won't be upfront about that. And then once we put a valuation in, then they say, oh, well, I thought this. So they usually always do. And it's because they've done their own background and research. But then it's up to us to then demonstrate, right, okay, this is why we're at this level and you're maybe at this. And looking at online listings that aren't priced correctly could be one of those main factors that have took them in a different direction or got them to the wrong level.
And that's the thing, as an agent as well, ideally you have done your research before you're going out to that property. You've taken the information that you need in the first place when you've initially spoke to the potential landlord. And when we go out, 9 times out of 10, we know the value, at least a ballpark, as to what that property is going to be before we're even stepping foot in it. And then obviously it comes down to, once we've seen it, if there's anything extra to add some extra value, if they've perhaps got an extension, that's when obviously our knowledge comes into it, because you have to do your back work for it. I remember before I started this job, I was like, oh, they just go in and they give you a valuation once they've seen it. But It's not the case. We do our homework before we come out and see properties.
Yeah, and it's a combination of knowing the market, doing your research, and also having that knowledge when you get there to pick up on things. Right, okay, do you know what, you could get there and it could have additional features, or do you know what I mean? It could be something really spectacular, or do you know what, the view could be something, and it's right across the sea, and you didn't really get that from your back. There's a combination of things. So what else, Kevin?
So as I touched on, obviously looking for the correct demographic as to what type of tenant that you're looking for when you're looking to purchase your new buy-to-let. So consider that sharers generally want convenience, so a social scene and transport links, while families want quiet roads, schools, and easy parking. I think easy parking is a key one for a lot of people now, but these are all things to take into consideration.
I always say one of the main things, or a few of the main things, is parking and storage are things that always come up.
Yes, I always highlight storage cupboards when I'm doing my viewings. But yeah, definitely parking. A property with parking goes down a lot better than one without it. So if you can find one that does have parking, it's always beneficial. But also things such as interior fittings matter. So from practicality and durability for families to more modern design for high-earning singles or couples as well can be more attractive. So remembering it's easy to fall in love with a property and think it's a bargain, but that doesn't necessarily mean it'll be the best rental following the categories that we've covered today. So these are all things to take into consideration and do your due diligence.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you need to have a target audience, whether your property is targeted for families, or whether you're going to look at maybe professional couples, or you know, we've got one coming up in St Andrews, and ideally it's going to be students, but it doesn't have an HMO, so you know, we're going to have to be careful with that one and find the right person to go in there. So yeah, you need to have that in mind, definitely. But there's a lot of factors that come into the valuation process, and it's like I said there before, we at the beginning, you need to have somebody like an agent who knows the market right down to the individual streets at least. But yeah, we see it changing from one end of the street to the next sometimes, depending on what the actual individual property is like. So yeah, knowledge is key, I think, in that aspect when it comes to the market, especially when it's the kind of market that we're in just now. And it does change. I mean, it changes. We roll back to the summer, it was different. We roll back to last year, it was different. It does continually change, and people that's got like boots on the ground and experience in that are the best people to advise you.
Yeah, I mean, even the difference between like August and September has just been crazy. So the market, it does change on a monthly basis, basically. So it's keeping up to date with that and what the demand is as well. Obviously, like we said, you don't want your property to be sitting on the market for too long. So making sure it's priced correctly in the first place. And obviously landlords are trying to get the best return just now with the way the interest rates are, but it's weighing up whether that's going to work or whether it's going to sit there and then you're going to be losing out on money for a couple of months while it's sitting vacant. So all these things have to be taken into consideration when it comes around to both buying a new investment, and reletting as well if you've got a tenant moving out.
Yeah, and things do change, and we keep track of what we do and when we do it and things. And we were looking at it the other day, and I had picked up on that. Usually the performance has changed slightly from previous years, and it's just because the cycle of things has kind of shifted on the other side of lockdown and COVID and all that has changed things. So yeah, anyway, but like I say, somebody that's educated in how the market is ever changing and how it is in the local area is really important. Number 2 was not having a vision, Karen. And even though they might not be conscious of it, most landlords do have a long-term goal. They do have a plan. They've maybe not thought it out properly in their head, but I think in the back of their mind, they will think, even if they're an accidental landlord and they're going to be renting out their property because they've inherited it, or they're moving for their job, they will have a long-term plan, like, well, I'm going to go and work for so long, so I only want to rent it for so long, or, you know, there is some sort of plan there. So more often than not, it falls into one of the following categories, and you could, I mean, people feel free to join in and say, and let me know if these do actually resemble any of your plans if you're a landlord or an investor. But obviously receiving an income through to retirement is quite a popular one. Now, you may want to schedule future maintenance and things sooner to minimise costs and hassle after you stop working. So the retirement plan is quite a common one. Passing on a legacy to your children, I mean, that's a big thing for Jim and his portfolio, and his whole business model is to pass that on through the generations and down, obviously, and to his children and things. Now, this makes inheritance tax planning an essential part of your strategy, and you really need to think about that and to minimise liability and have those in limited companies and even into then a trust for passing down generations and things as well. Those are all things you'll have to think about. Now, I'd love to hear if somebody's listening and they think, God, well, I'm doing my buy-to-let portfolio so that I could leave it for my children and pass it down. And have you thought about inheritance tax? Have you thought about putting it? I mean, are they in a limited company? Are they in your own name? Do you have a trust set up to pass them on once you're not here? These are all things definitely need to think about. And then also cashing in your properties at some point, if that's what your plan is. Set money aside for your monthly rent to renovate your property just before you maybe sell it to get the best price, and push the price point as high as it possibly can be if ultimately you do intend to sell, and capital appreciation is your main strategy. So Karen, your frontline lettings, do you see a lot of these different strategies and people have these different goals?
Yeah, I think quite often when people are starting out, it's not things that they've actually thought about. It's more kind of things that they're like, oh, well, that'll be fine, I'll deal with it further down the line. But it's like, well, have you thought about your next property purchasing it as in a limited company? Because, yeah, there's just so many different implications for it. So it's, when it comes to property, you have to be forward planning for it, whether that is wanting to use it as your retirement investment, whether that's wanting to be able to pass it down to your children. It requires forward planning from the get-go, basically. So speaking to the right people to get that advice.
It's quite like when I say about when we go out to do an appraisal and look at people's property and give them a value and things, and it's always like, do you have an expectation of what you want to achieve? No, I've not got a clue. And then when you do go to the valuation, they're like, oh, well, I thought this, and it's like, so you did have an expectation then. And I think this is the same thing. It's like, what's your plan? Do you know what, like, is it retirement? And oh, I'm not quite sure. And then as you have that conversation and ask the right questions and things, you establish, right, okay, well, this is a retirement plan for you, or this is like, you're going to, you're just holding on to this till maybe it's a better market to sell it and get a bit more money, or, do you know, and so there's always something, whether they actually realise it or not. So, and again, it comes down to having someone that, like ourselves, or a reputable agent who knows the right questions to ask to then obviously then best serve and advise the landlord or the investor in their journey and what their ultimate goal is.
I think quite often as well, people have got a vague idea at least of what they would like to do, but it's maybe just the implementation of that they're not sure about. Like you say, want to make it my retirement home or want to sell it further down the line, then it's like, right, well, how are you going to get to that step? So that's obviously what an agent's there for, to advise them how to do it, basically. Yeah,
because I mean, it's simple enough if somebody wants to buy a property and rent it out, but thinking beyond that, I'll say it's simple enough, but do you know what I mean? That people think that, well, that's fine, I'll just buy the property, let it out. But thinking beyond that from the very beginning will help you obviously achieve what you hope to have in the future and make it far more likely as well, especially when it comes down to things like considering inheritance tax and tax planning, and do you know what I say about trusts and things like that. I mean, they're all things that can become quite complicated. And if you try and do that at the last minute, it's like, no, you should have had all that in place and planned that well in advance. So yeah, having a vision is important, and a lot of people might have one, but they've not really executed that plan to facilitate that vision and the goal at the end. So that's a really important one. What is number 3, Karen?
So cashing your properties in at some point. If this is an option that you want to do, it can be beneficial to set some money aside from the monthly rent to renovate the property just before you're away to sell it to achieve the highest possible value for it. There is nothing like a fresh coat of paint, some fresh flooring down. A lot of people, when they're looking at properties, some can see the potential, but there's a lot of people that can't, and they do just want something that's ready to move into. So if you set aside a little bit of money each month from the rent, when it does come around to the point where you want to sell it, that freshen up can make all the difference between what you can achieve and a sales value for it.
Yeah, it's always good to have that. That just if you're going to come to the market and you want to achieve the best price, then do you know, have it all fresh, clean. It's amazing what, like you say, a lick of paint and new floor coverings and things could do to to a property that's been a rental just to bring it back into that level of marketing for sale, and it really does achieve a better price point if that is your strategy. So yeah, and then number 3 is doing everything yourself. I'll let you cover that.
Yes, so it's sensible to keep costs of owning a rental home under control. So obviously we've seen it all the time, people can get a bit carried away, but we meet plenty of landlords who basically drown themselves in trying to do everyday tasks instead of enjoying the dream of it. Ultimately, you want a rental property that ticks itself over quite nicely each month, but that's not always the case. I mean, we see it all the time. We're getting phone calls of things needing repaired, maintenance needing done, maybe a tenant's not behind on their rent for the month. There's a lot more that goes into it. So trying to do everything yourself, it can be really overwhelming for a landlord, especially if this is not what you do on a day-to-day basis. When you've got a rental property to deal with, you're working 5 days a week, you're coming home, you've got families to deal with as well. There's a lot to deal with for it. So like I say, it can become a bit overwhelming.
So I think it would be, I mean, Karen, you worked in property management for several years, and I think it would be fair to say that there's a fair degree of work and time and headspace in managing a rental property, and it's quite a lot for just one person. So give us a reminder on things that really do take up all that time and effort and headspace.
So one of the things that we've touched on already is keeping on top of legislation. That's such an important one, making sure your property is kept compliant. We've touched on all the property safety certificates that you need. They like to add more in as well. So Fife Council like to bring in the council like to bring in a little bit more each year. We see new ones creeping in. So there's a lot of legislation to keep on top of, not only with your property's compliance, but just the general ins and outs of renting a property, whether it's notice, rent increases. There's so much legislation.
There's a lot of new stuff being implemented. I mean, it'd be interesting, I mean, if people are listening, do you actually know how much pieces of legislation there is to contend with? And I think Jim mentioned it at the beginning, but you're looking at about 170 pieces of legislation. I know we've got the predominant ones that we are running through here, but there's a lot of other ones as well. And to keep on top of that that's a challenge in itself.
Yeah, so obviously you've got the legislation, general ins and outs, dealing with repairs, checking that the rent's paid on time. It can be a very uncomfortable one to have to deal with as a private landlord. And handling any tenant problems and disputes as well. You could have neighbours phoning up complaining about your tenants, or vice versa, your tenant complaining about their neighbours. So there's always these uncomfortable situations to deal with when it comes to renting out a property, which is why beneficial to have an agent, because it takes away all that personal side of it as well. So it's our job to be looking after a landlord's investment, making sure that tenancy runs nice and smoothly. So for us, having to phone up about somebody not paid their rent or they've been a bit noisy the night before, it's not as uncomfortable for us to deal with compared to what it would be for just a typical self-managing landlord.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these conversations, they're not the easiest to do, and if it's not something that you do generally day to day, whereas if you're working in property management, lettings and things, it's part of what you do, and you know how to approach them and mediate and deal with that situation. Whereas a lot of self-managed landlords might want to do that conversation or might tackle it in the wrong way, using the wrong kind of language or using the wrong kind of even just down to body language if they're speaking to the person and things. It could all go pear-shaped very quickly. So mediation skills that are key.
Yes. Keyword here, mediation. Try and resolve things rather than have them escalating. So ensuring the property safety certificates are kept up to date, one of the ones that we've touched on throughout the show. So also this covers appliances, making sure that appliances and fittings are working. So for gas, electric, fire alarms, energy performance, Legionella, you've got them all in there that you have to make sure that you're keeping on top of. So each certificate has a different timescale for when it needs renewed as well. So obviously making sure that you're keeping your gas up to date every year, making sure your EICR is up to date every 5 years. They're such important ones.
That's a good point, Kim, because obviously you've got all these certificates and that's fine. You might think, well, I've got them all in place, but then do you have a reminder system? Like you say, gas search annually, your EICR, which is electrical safety, is every 5 years. smoke alarms are valid for every 10 years. Your EPC is 10 years, and they're bringing in minimal EPC banding as well. You've got mortgage rates expiring. You've got your landlord insurance renewals and things. So you need to think of all of that.
Yeah, that's the thing. It doesn't just, when it comes to dates, it's not just a case of keeping on top of your property safety certificates. Like you say, you've got your insurance renewals, expiring mortgage rates, annual servicing as well, and mid-tenancy inspections. That is one that, if you're self-managing, again, can be a little bit uncomfortable, but we would always advise. Spoke with a landlord and they were like, oh, it's great, I never really hear from my tenant. And I'm like, but have you done an inspection? No.
Inspections are just the most, they are a challenge, even for agents, and it's not even for the fact of doing the inspection. There's a lot involved with doing an inspection properly in terms of what to look out for. And I mean, it doesn't have to be a big invasive inspection, and I say that to landlords and tenants. You know, it doesn't have to be something that makes everybody feel uncomfortable. It's generally, let us at least see it. We see in every room, have a perimeter walk around the property, but it's looking for the right things and those red flags that could possibly turn into something that could be a costly repair. And you know, and so the inspection itself is one part of the challenge, but it's actually getting commitment and getting it booked in, and But if you've got a good relationship with tenants and build that rapport and things, and they know that you come in, it's not a bad thing, then that's fine. And that's why agent and tenant relationships really important for us as well.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, no landlord has ever told us that they enjoy doing all of these tasks on their own. So give these things away that you don't love doing and free yourself up to work on your business rather than in your business.
Yeah, definitely. And as I say, we see more and more. I mean, there's a lot of talk about people exiting the market and landlords selling up, and I mean, it is happening. But we have a lot of enthusiastic and new investor landlords coming through who are excited about the industry and building portfolio, and it's not just all about making money. You know, they are in it to have their own business and proud of providing housing and being part of the private rented sector and things. So, I mean, there's a lot of positives in it, but you need to be quite business savvy in the fact that if you're concentrating on doing that and building that portfolio, have the right people in place to help you do that. And that involves not just obviously letting agents like ourselves, but also for the proper mortgage advice and financial advice and tax advice, and you know, and have all those right people, or have somebody that can point you in the direction of all those the right people to speak to. And don't try and do it all yourself, because you won't be able to. Because I mean, there's stuff when it comes to mortgage advice, and a lot of people come to me and say about buy-to-let mortgage. I refer them on to the right people. 9 times out of 10, it's Kesser Salimi at Freedom Financial. Kesser's brilliant. He's a landlord himself. He's got he specialises in buy-to-let financing and bridging loans and all the rest of it. I couldn't advise you on that, but he does, and he could specialise in that. So yeah, like I say, it's referrals to the right people.
Yeah, it's knowing who to speak to, and if you're not the right person specifically, being able to then pass that on to the right person so that client's getting that right piece of advice.
Yeah, people fall into the trap of trying to learn how to do everything and know everything, and you don't need to, because everybody's got their specialist field. Let them deal with that part for you, and if somebody does that really well, then
let them do it for you.
Let them and pay them to do it, because it will save you dividends and time and effort and, do you know what I mean, stress and all the rest of it. So we see it often.
And ultimately, when it comes to buy-to-lets, your finances are such an important part of it, whether that's paying a mortgage, whether it's the rent coming in, whether it's your mortgage rates. There is so much that goes into it. So a big mistake that landlords can make is not staying on top of their finances. Yeah,
and that's point number 4, and that brings us on nicely. And you're right, Karen, not staying on top of your finances, and as well as providing a comfortable and safe home for tenants. Like I say, being a responsible landlord means running your buy-to-let where it is lucrative and it is essentially a bona fide business. So this means a really conscientious financial management of both the legal and the personal level. So that could include reviewing your rents, and now we're allowed to do this annually now, but obviously the 3%, which the Scottish Government's brought in. So yeah, keep an eye on rents, have them priced correctly, if it's in between tenancies, like we've been doing that recently, Karen, obviously trying to price them correctly with the market and people's. I think it also within reasonable scope for people's affordability, because there's no point in overpricing something and then getting the wrong person that can't afford it. And there's a whole knock-on effect of doing that correctly. And regardless of whether your tenants are staying or if you need to find new ones, you need to obviously look at the rent levels, especially with the current situation with rent freezes and everything.
Yeah, whenever a landlord asks me, they're like, what's the rental market like? And I'm like, as long as you have the right property on at the right price, it will still go quickly. But ultimately, we are in a issue with living costs right now, rising living cost crisis. So it is really hard for people to pay the essentials like their rent, like their gas, electric, council tax, food. So if you've got a property that's ridiculously overpriced, it's going to sit there and then it's going to have the knock-on effect on yourself as well. I mean, last year people were paying crazy rents. They were taking any property they could because there was not a lot on the market. Whereas this year there's still not a lot on the market, but if a property is overpriced, people are still not going to take it because they are more conscious now about what they're spending.
I was just going to say, so, and why do you think that is? And well, I know why that is, but obviously that's because people are far more conscientious of what they are spending. People are really interested in what an energy performance of a property is. I mean, when I first started and EPCs come in and things, and it's like people didn't even know what they were. They were like, "What's an EPC?" And I'm like, "This is the energy performance level of the property," and it's like they would never look at it again. But
it's something I get asked a lot more on viewings now. What is the EPC rate and what's the council tax band? It's on all over listings, but people still like to ask.
I know. I mean, we obviously by law have to show the energy performance certificate and the EPC level, and the landlord registration and all the rest of it on the listing anyway. We incorporated the council tax band because it's a question you always get asked. But it's something, the EPC level is something that people look at because of the impact on what it's going to cost them to heat the property and run the property if it's a really low energy efficiency level. And then if you've got something that's priced really high in terms of rental value, then they've got that, and then they've got council tax, they've got the utilities, they've got their day-to-day living, they've got shopping, and everything mounts up. And we are still in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Is appropriately made.
Sorry, I've had people that have not proceeded with a property, like when we've been perhaps pitching some, and the deciding factor has been the council tax band. They're like, rent not so bad, but they're like, I'm not paying that in council tax each month, and that's been the deciding factor as to why they've not come to view a property or wanted to proceed with it. So it is something that people are a lot more conscious of now.
Yeah, definitely. And that's from a tenant's perspective. And I think that from a landlord's perspective as well, keeping an eye on regular costs like professional services, the mortgage interest rates, insurance premiums and maintenance contracts, to be sure you're getting the best for value. Look at your renewals for your insurance, and don't just let your insurance company renew and leave it as it is. At this, I mean, we've had a lot of people that have had some gastronomical renewal prices, and it's knowing the right people. Like, who will I go and get a comparison quote for? Do I just jump on these comparison websites, or do you know somebody that's really good? We have a good insurance provider now that I would refer people to, which is a really good rate, because that's something else that's just hiked up massively.
Like car insurance, like you shop about when it's time for a renewal for it. You never just take the first deal.
Yeah, and also having the knowledge to claim your expenses and what expenses you claim as well, whether that be your receipts, and having them obviously compiled for tax return, and to remove any last minute obviously stray papers and things when you do your tax return. Have a proper I mean, we provide our landlords with monthly statements of their income from their rental property, and then expenditure and things as well. And it's so easy for them just to collate that, and that goes in to declare the additional income from their on their tax return. But also, if you've got an agent who's managing the property and things, your management fees and things are all tax deductible as well, and that's all on your statement if you've got an agent, what it should be. So yeah, that's all things to think about as well. So I think staying on top of all of this will give you your business ultimately the feeling of a well-oiled machine, and you won't have that stress of, do you know what I mean, having things all over the place. And it's good for you. It's good for your bank balance. It's good for you. It's good for your stress levels, and it's even better for your sleeping patterns. And the amount of landlords we see that come to us who are self-managed, and we're seeing it a lot more. And I think because of the current situation with legislation and changes, there's more and more landlords are coming to us and saying, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And that is something that's becoming more and more common. And more than often, they are their stress levels are high. Their sleeping patterns are done. They're at the end of their tether, basically. Is probably the best way to put it. So yeah, have the right people helping you, and don't be that landlord that's left in that position, because it's a horrible mindset to be in when you're pushed to the brink like that. And that's why a lot of people as well have decided to exit the market, because it's just too much for them. Whereas if you do have an agent in place, it could take all that away, and it could save you having to give up your business ultimately. So.
Exactly. Nobody needs to be overwhelmed, especially when you can have somebody looking after everything for you, basically.
Yeah. So, and then number 5, Karen, is not being protected. So run us through that.
So imagine we told you that we lived in the hope that nothing will ever go wrong, and therefore we have no contingency plans. I mean, would you ask us to manage your property? Probably not.
No.
So processes, paperwork, and protection, they are not things that are very appealing. However, they are essential for any business to avoid the constant threat of crisis. So feel the pain and do it anyway. So you always have to have contingency plans in place. We are very system organized. We have to be organized, and we have to have things in place that if anything goes wrong, whether that's a tenant's boiler stops working in winter time. Unfortunately, our plumbers have been called out on Christmas Day. Like, there's all things.
I have only had to do that once, but I mean, at least we've got the people there to do it if we need to.
And that's the thing, we have the contingencies in place for that.
Yeah.
I mean, especially I always say to landlords, you don't want phone calls. They happen at the worst of times. You could be on holiday and getting a phone call that your tenants locked themselves out, or their boiler stopped working. Anything could go wrong, basically. When it comes to properties, there's always scope for something.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, Ken, processes, paperwork, and protection. We spoke about this just through the week there, and how you like to be quite very organised and have a process and have a system, and it's so important to do that. And paperwork and things all over the place, and it just doesn't it wash now.
No, I am very meticulously organised. My paperwork has places for everything to go, processes for everything. Even my files on my laptop are all organised for like what documents I'm waiting to be signed, anything like that. So you have to be, ultimately, you can't come into this line of work or venture if you are doing it by yourself and not be organised. You have to have systems in place. You have to have paperwork in place. It is there's a lot that goes into it. So if you're not organised, it can become chaotic, and that's when mistakes are made.
Yeah, we also have quite a comprehensive software system, which is really good and quite organised in terms of dates and just everything. So yeah, I mean, that is such an important part of running lettings and obviously helping people manage their buy-to-let business. So run us through some of the things that people do.
So when it comes to protection, one of the main things we would advise is obviously taking a security deposit. So this will come into account when the tenancy ends. If there needs to be any claims made, then this is what the deposit is there for. So always protect the tenancy deposit. Legally, it has to be in a deposit protection scheme. It cannot just be held in your bank account. No. So obviously we use Safe Deposit Scotland, but there are various deposit protection schemes out there. So you can use one that suits yourself. Yeah, so as long as you are using one, you legally have to have it in there. So with ourselves, saving the £20-30 fee is hardly compensation for risking a fine of 3 months' rent.
And you can't. And I've seen it happen. And it's amazing how many landlords are unaware that they need to bank their deposit in a deposit scheme now. And it's been around for years now. I mean, it's not like this isn't like this didn't come out last year or something. It's not something that's new. And it's a thing that let only landlords, when they come to us and we ask, well, what scheme's your deposit in? Oh, I've got it, I'll send it to you. And it's like, okay, that should have been done at the beginning of the tenancy.
And that's the thing, when you do lodge a deposit, the deposit protection scheme notify the tenant of their details as well. So if your tenant's not getting that initial set up confirmation email with their deposit, they're going to know that you've not banked their deposit if you are doing it as a let only side. So as I say, do you want the 3 months fine for it? So yeah, nobody wants that. So bank the deposit in a protection scheme.
You don't want a fine. Rigorous referencing, Karen, this is your thing.
Yes. So I stick to a rigorous referencing process and prepared a detailed inventory with photos to avoid poor quality tenants or unclaimed damages. So obviously there's a lot that goes into referencing. There's a lot that has to go into referencing to make sure that you're finding the right tenant. I always say to a landlord, it's not about putting the first person in a property, it's about putting the right person in. Yeah. It is so hard to get the wrong tenant out just now. So ultimately, you never know, nobody's going to be ironclad that they are going to be the perfect tenant, but taking as many preventative measures in the first place can obviously minimise the damage potentially that can be caused from having the wrong tenant in place. And as I say as well, inventories. A lot of landlords, we get so many that are like, my property's unfurnished, why do I need an inventory? Well, if the property needs a clean at the end of it, if the paintwork needs sorted, if the flooring needs replaced, right down to your fixtures and fittings like lights, sockets, and kitchens as well. There is so many things that could potentially be damaged in a property. So for the sake of however much it might cost you for an inventory, then obviously it's well worth it at the end of the tenancy. I mean, even if you're needing a clean, you could be looking at an excess of over £100 for a clean at the end of a tenancy.
That's just a general sparkle clean, you know.
Yeah.
If you need a deep clean, it could be more expensive.
And without an inventory in place, you effectively don't have a deposit claim anymore. And obviously, it has really tightened up over the last few years. I've seen a real difference in it, even in the 7 years that I've been dealing with them. So it is a big change. So it is something that an inventory is highly advisable, even if your property is unfurnished.
Yeah, the inventory is such a common thing for people to think that I don't need one, it's fine. And what's even more alarming sometimes is we had one recently, and you probably know what I'm talking about in a minute, but they do a completely new refurb and they don't want an inventory, and it's got brand new everything, fixtures, fittings, right down to everything. And again, it's the misconception of, I don't have furnishings and things in this. And I don't know, I can't remember if it was myself or you that explained, like, this is why you need one. And we got one put in place, and we've got the one next door coming on, and we didn't even have to say anything. I think she wrote an email saying, can you please do the inventory for this one as well? Because she now understands that's why you need one in place. And I don't know if she's seen the actual inventory for her property, or we sent her an example.
So
and she
I'd gone back.
We'll get it now, yeah.
Yeah, I'd gone back to her and explained obviously why you need one. Effectively, you don't have a claim if you don't have an inventory. You have just done a brand new refurb on the property. Everything is nice and fresh in it. And I'd sent over a sample of one of the ones that our contractors carry out as well. So obviously it's very detailed. I mean, it's at least 50 pages long, and that's photos, descriptions, conditions. There's so much detail that goes into it. So obviously when a landlord sees maybe you're paying £100 for a 2-bedroom unfurnished inventory, but when you see the detail that goes into that and for the protection that gives you, it's well worth the money. Because we've had landlords that have said, I'll do it myself, and they'll send over a Word document with a list of maybe things that are in the property, and I'm like, okay, thank you, but that's not going to work.
You can use that. I mean, they're not mandatory. Inventories, condition reports, they're not mandatory. They're just highly advisable. And my professional or our professional opinion, you do need them. And we've done training with Safe Deposit Scotland to know exactly that we're doing the right thing and advising properly. And I mean, you could have a Word document inventory, and as long as the tenant signs it, then it could be used. But when it comes to maybe adjudication on deciding whether there's a claim to be made, the adjudicators will look at that and say, well, you don't have enough evidence here to support your claim because I don't have a photo, or you've not described that properly in terms of the terminology of how you describe something. There's a lot involved, and that's why we have an independent inventory clip that does that. So yeah, definitely worth their weight in gold.
Yes, very much so. But obviously there's different forms of protection when it comes to being a landlord. So taking out insurance for contents, emergencies, accidents, and non-payment of rent, the relatively small cost that can more than outweigh the potential hassle of not being covered.
Yeah, a good insurance cover is something that's really important. And we touched on that earlier about the cost of insurance renewals and the cost going up as well. So trying to find something that's quite competitive, especially if you've got more than one or two properties. You know, if you have several properties, you're trying to find a really good deal that's going to cover them all and cover you from a liability aspect, from obviously if you've got contents and buildings, and if you want to have that additional rent, the rent protection in there as well, you could incorporate that. So yeah, finding a good insurance setup for your buy-to-let is really important.
Yeah, because ultimately the fact is that the unexpected does happen. It does happen when it's inconvenient, and having nothing in place to protect yourself will always be a lingering thought. So for good peace of mind, instead, make sure that you are protected when it comes to all the things that we've just covered.
Yeah, I think so. Like we said at the beginning, we've picked out 5 points here, and it's the knowledge of the local market and your long-term business vision and goal, the valuing time as much as you do maybe value money, because obviously your time is so important. Commercially minded and financial management of your buy-to-let and your properties as well, and planning for the unexpected, and that's what we've just covered with insurances and things as well. These 5 points are maybe the main headlines of topics that could go wrong, but there's just such a vast amount of things that can happen in that journey of buy-to-let and letting property. And without doing it properly, you do leave yourself wide open to fines and legal side of things as well. And plus, I think it goes hand in hand in the fact that these legislations and rules and things that you're asked or obviously have to follow are not just obviously there to protect the tenant as well and provide a safe and legal environment for them to live in the property as well. It keeps everybody, I think, safe and everything above board, and that's an important part as well. Abiding by these laws make it a better experience for everyone, landlord, tenant, and the whole process. And I think that's the important thing to remember. So yeah, we've maybe broke it down into 5 main topics to cover the area of things that go under them, but there's a lot of things that go hand in hand with the whole buy-to-let and letting experience. Karen, you know that firsthand from doing property management and then your frontline lettings now as well. So it's all these things are all far too familiar to us, and especially I think predominantly it's coming as people coming from self-managed let only to then coming to us and saying, right, well, I need you to manage this because, and then we see where everything's went wrong. Yeah. So definitely. So I think ultimately for me, if you would like to enjoy life more as a landlord or an investor and things, then it's really important to speak to the right people, have the right people on your side dealing with things. And that's not just us as a letting agent. I don't know if it's a mortgage advisor, if it's a financial advisor, just to say like tax planning and things as well. If you're thinking about your long-term goal, you need to have all that in place. Proper insurance and renewing things properly and when they need to be at a good rate, and compliance. I can't enforce that anymore because that is the big thing just now, compliance and changes in legislation as well. But if you want to hear about any of that, I've put in the blog here my direct mobile and email, so feel free, anybody could contact me. It would be good to hear anybody else's views on if you are a self-managed let-only landlord, if you have any of these problems or haven't considered anything that we've covered today, feel free to come to myself or indeed Karen, and we would be happy to help anybody or give you advice or point you in the direction of the right person to give you the advice. That's the important thing as well. What's your final thoughts, Karen?
I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. When it comes to buy-to-lets, it can be overwhelming or it can be something that is dealt with for you. So I definitely know which one I would rather have.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that was great. Thanks for joining me, Karen, and running us through those 5 points. But as I say, there's a lot more to it, but we can't cover it all in one show. But yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for everybody that's watching, and we'll finish up there for today. Jim was on at the beginning. Jim's on his travels again. The Wealth Creation Show is Monday at 12:30, and Jim's going to. I'm going to be interviewing Jim live. He'll be in Miami. I've got a lot of questions for him. He's on his travels, and we'll speak more about what that journey is. Monday 12:30, the Wealth Creation Show. Please do not miss that, guys. It's going to be good. But until then, I will see you later, and thanks for joining me, Kieran. Have a lovely day.
You too.
Thanks. Bye.